Our next session, Decarbonization in Action, Global Trends and Future Directions. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer, Halcyon, Nat Bullard, former UK Minister of State of Energy and Clean Growth, co-chair of the Global Imperatives Advisory Board at WBCSD, Sustainability to Terrascope, Claire Perry O'Neill, CCO Terrascope, Felipe Daguila, CEP at CDP, Sherry Madeira.
Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Nat Bullard. We're going to have a very heads-up conversation on a topic that, given its breadth, I'm going to begin by making us define. So you've heard our bios, but I'll ask everybody to do a very quick capsule version themselves and tell me what it is that decarbonization actually means relevant to you. So not theory so much as practice. And Claire?
Thank you. Great. I'm sure there are friends out there. I just can't see
There are.
you.
We can't see. To be clear, we see no one. So
great to see you. What a great week it is in Climate Week. Thank you, Nat. So I'm the former Minister of Energy and Clean Growth, brought in the UK's net zero legislation, brought COP26 to the UK, and was heavily involved initially in that process. I have thankfully left politics and am now working very much in the private and NGO sector on really just trying to accelerate decarbonisation. And my thesis is you go to where the emissions are and where the motivation is and try and speed things up. And so two quick thoughts. So decarbonisation is actually quite simple mathematically. You know, we need to reduce in absolute terms the level of CO2 going into the atmosphere. And of course, we have the Keeling curve, so we can see, are we being successful or not? And the answer is we aren't. And that, to me, is a simple factor of reduction and removal. There are but that's when it gets tricky, right? Because then there are other categories that people like to talk about a lot. So the question, of course, is relative decarbonisation. When I was the minister, we talked a lot about the UK, who had managed to reduce emissions more than any other G7 country. And we had done that without crashing the economy, which is quite an effective way of reducing national emissions. So there is, I think, a question around carbon intensity. And again, if we know the numerator and denominator, we can then figure out if these things are actually working in the same direction. And increasingly, we're starting to have interesting conversations now about avoided emissions. What is the kind of net present value of an emission that we don't commit? All I know is this: we are 25 years behind where we need to be. And I just want us to stop doing quite so much dancing on the head of a pin around definitions and start measuring and monitoring what we know to be true, that is at government level and at corporate level, we actually can prove that emissions are falling. And that's why I'm so delighted to be on the panel with both Terrascope and also with CDP, who do such an amazing job.
Thank you. Felipe.
Yes, thank you for having me. I think I'm going to build on the part that Claire mentioned, what we see in Terrascope as decarbonization. We always try to focus decarbonization not only about the measurement, but how decarbonization can create value. So for me, I think when we think about the decarbonization and the companies that we work all over the world is, how can I look beyond measuring my footprint, understanding my data, but what are those decarbonization initiatives that I can run that can also create corporate value? And I want to share a true story here. So probably 1.5 years ago, I was having a session with the Chief Sustainability Officer and the CEO of a very well-known large corporation. And the question that he came to me and said, Felipe, I know I need to report, I know I need to measure, my board is asking, I know there's regulation, but is there a way that I can invest in decarbonization and save cost? That was the challenge that he put for us. And it is possible. I think for me, decarbonization, until we are able to connect the dots between measuring and what are the right initiatives that are going to decrease your carbon but going to create value, it's what we need to see and what we need to focus more. It cannot be only focused on measurement, it cannot be only focused on reporting. We need to flip the time that we spend in these activities to spend more time in decarbonization. That's why I think technology can play a very crucial role.
Thank you. Sherry.
Always good to come after a CDP partner who makes things practical. Thank you. Decarbonization. It's an action word. Right? Let's remind ourselves, it's an action word. And actually, that's where we have to keep thinking, which is how is it that we are taking a journey to a lower emissions world? I'm not going to repeat everything that my fellow panelists have said. I wholly agree. And of course, what I would say as CDP, who is the global disclosure platform for climate data, you need to measure so that you can do that management that we're talking about. And it's in an issue right now is that there's a big burden. Everyone is talking about how much disclosure is going to cost, this enormous burden coming out of the EU, but elsewhere in terms of mandatory disclosures. And I'm here to assure everyone in this room and beyond that disclosure works. So from the first year that a company discloses, its emissions go down within 2 years by 7 to 10%. That's a fact. So if we're talking about what is decarbonization, decarbonization is realizing the impacts that you're making, understanding how that works, and how that works through not only your own impacts, through your scope 1 and your scope 2, if we're going to start getting technical, but also your scope 3. And Felipe, I'm a data company. Let me put some data behind what you said, which is companies cutting their scope 3 emissions have saved $13.6 billion in costs over the last couple of years, according to CDP data. They've also been able to deliver 43 million tons of GHG savings in the same period of time. So it's money down and emissions down. That's what I think decarbonization should and can be.
So I'll follow that with a bit of a provocation. How well do companies themselves understand that what they view as a cost is actually accruing as a savings? Do they know that themselves, or do you tell them that?
The questions that we ask require them to make those calculations, and that is revealing in its own right. And as they journey through the maturity, and that's what we're hoping for, is the first day of disclosure, this is quite a big lift, and perhaps there are only certain questions, or what questions are being the most important to them, what are the use cases for that data, and again, we have to keep revealing that. Data is not for data's sake. So as they're starting to get those answers, then they're actually getting the reveal. Do they know that when they come to the first point of disclosure? Some do, some don't. So we all need to, as partners in this journey, remind that this is a positive opportunity, not just for the planet, but actually for business.
And I appreciate that, and it will take me to the next one, which is for you, Felipe, which is, do the companies that you work with view this opportunistically or defensively? Like, is this part of strategy to reduce risk? Is it part of strategy to see gain? Is it a bit of both? How is it that your client companies are reflecting on the work that you do for them in this process?
Yeah, I think we always see, we work with companies all over the world, large enterprises in different sectors, like very focused specifically on the food and agriculture value chain. But I almost can separate those companies, putting aside a couple of exceptions, in what I call 70, 20, 10.
Okay.
70% of these companies, they are still doing this, and they are doing focus on reporting, measure their footprint, and I'll say most of their time are still spent on that. Obviously, mainly driven by regulation or by investors, or because they are large B2B customers that they have. They say, I'm not going to purchase from you anymore if you don't disclose the data, right? But what I see also in this part is there is a lot of analysis paralysis on that. There is a lot of time spending. How much more granular can I go? How can I go back? Do I need to report more or less? And then you enter on those cycles of approval of approval of approval of approval of data and validation. So then when you go on the other 20% of companies, that what they are doing, which I think is working very well, they are looking this, bringing the sustainability team close to the business, right? And how do they do that? So for example, we have a series of customers that what they do in the packaging space, they say, how can we bring in the sales and the marketing team? So if you're going to go to the company that use my packaging, how can we use this as a lever to help them to transition? So those are my package options. Each one has a different carbon footprint. How I'll help you to transition? So they are bringing this close to the business. So the narrative starts to change from checking a box on reporting and regulation, but how can I create value? And then we have this very, very small portion of the companies that I think they're still in this loop of what do I need to do in terms of decarbonization? There is still a lack of understanding and simplicity to give you some data also, one example, so we work, for example, with a palm oil company, and We use a lot of artificial intelligence to do research in several papers that exist for generations, and on top of that analysis, we also have a sustainability and climate team to do a quality check. And when you look all of that in the particular the palm oil case, you find around 520 papers, scientific papers explaining how to do it, how to decarbonize. But it's extremely complicated. So when you really dive deep, actually there are 4 or 5 that are actually useful and have the same type of information. So the level of simplicity that we need to bring in terms of the jargon or how to use technology to simplify decarbonization, I think that's the key challenge that we need to address.
So this is, you've set me up, thank you, perfectly for the question that Claire and I discussed when we were prepping. And Claire said something to me, and I'm going to quote it verbatim, and you can reflect on it, which was, acronyms and specialism have been remarkably unsuccessful.
So, look, I studied geography at university, which is not about, in my case, was not about coloring in maps. It was about atmospheric science and remote sensing. So it was remarkably useful when I was a minister in the space. And what sort of struck me when I actually got into where we were and where we were with the COP process was how remarkably specialized and inward-looking it was. Almost by design, because the original COP conversation, as you know, was based on the Montreal Protocol, which was a G2G conversation. We solved that problem, partly solved it through regulation. It was a relatively simple problem set. The problem with decarbonization is it's a whole of economy transitional conversation. And somehow over the last 29 years, we have made it literally a specialist subject. And you will all know, you can probably all quote the number of acronyms around, you know, action plans and organizations and NDCs. And remarkably, the private sector has been almost completely excluded. Paris was really the first time we really tried to do an inclusive approach. Even the Glasgow COP, where by design we really wanted to include the private sector, the decision was made after I left that team to deplatform the oil and gas executives, which I found utterly perverse given the responsibility they have for emissions reduction. And if you read the Glasgow Declaration from the climate event, the number of times it mentions the word business is 0. This is not the way that we double down together and solve the problem. And I understand the motivation because this is a tough subject. You do need facts. You do need to really understand and be precise about what we're doing and avoid greenwashing. But everybody has to be involved. And we're starting, I think, and it's great to hear Sherry's points, we're starting to say this is extremely helpful to build on, but we have got to do better to accelerate further. And if I may finish on one other important thing. We all use the term just transition a lot. We absolutely want a climate transition that is a just transition. There is no working definition of a just transition that you can translate into numerical outcomes for a country, a region, or a company. And actually, I just came from an event, which is with a large consulting firm who have developed a framework, the Carbon Transition Impact Framework, that actually starts to quantify for a country what this starts to look like. And here's the news. Sometimes it's an inconvenient truth, because some countries do rather well out of a disorderly transition or maintaining a high carbon emission thing. So we have to be precise and we have to confront the problems, because it is both the specificity and the acronyms, but also these general phrases that we all nod and think are a good idea, that we can't quantify, and therefore we can't allocate capital and we can't de-risk. So I think this time has come to just all talk in the right language, and you had a great point yesterday about making sustainability data equivalent to financial data, because that's the way that you really start to move the dial. But I think it's kind of a plea to kind of come together and use fewer acronyms in the conversation.
So I always thought of it as financial data. I mean, it pertains to things you can measure, it pertains to ultimately the performance and the nature of the performance of the business. So Sherry, I'd like to actually ask you your reflection on what Felipe said about analysis paralysis. And is that something that I don't think you as a group probably encountered that, but does your constituency and does your market, so to speak, face that, or no?
I think we have to measure. So if analysis paralysis means we are going to stop measuring, then I don't agree. If what it means is we need to measure to act, then I fully agree that that is what we need to think about. And actually, some of these things are going in that direction. So for example, transition planning, buzzword has been around for a little while. Again, defining what that means. What is a transition plan? It means you have a target and you have a baseline,
yes,
and you're making a plan between point A and point B. And how do you make a plan, and how do you know if you are making progress, if you need to course correct? Well, you need to measure, and you need to have that data. So that all hangs together. And if you actually kind of pick a little bit out of what we spoke about before, it's kind of like financial planning, right? You know where you're trying to get to. You say that to the marketplace, to your investor, to your stakeholder, and you work along the way to be able to disclose how it is that that's how it's going. And I think the piece here that we all need to be really conscious of is you set a target, either a financial target or a sustainability target, and you are sometimes going to reach it, and sometimes you are not. And that's a financial target or a sustainability target. So I think we all need to make sure our carrots and our stick are appropriately wielded to the marketplace. Because what we can't have is we can't have targets that are unrealistic in the marketplace and that there is a great big stick that comes with that. That transition planning, I think, is the unlocker there to action. And it's also the insight for all of us to look at the companies and the countries and the cities and states and regions that are part of our lives and make decisions on the basis of not only what their target might say, but how it is that they're working along the way and how credible that is. And we're seeing more and more interest from CDP on what we've identified as 21 indicators of a credible transition plan. Now, perfect time for me to say, CDP is not here to judge. We're here to surface information. And so those pieces of data are, do you have that? Are you being transparent on those 21 indicators? And then that is for the actors to judge if they are good, bad, best practice, comparable in benchmarks, et cetera. But if you do not have that data, if you're not identifying and helping the world, say that these 21 are the ones you need to look at, and if they're absent, you have to ask the company, the city, the country with the target, how are you measuring this? Because I'm not sure if I believe you. And that's the worst thing. It's better to be transparent.
Yeah. Just to build on topic, I think, Sherry, which I think it's very, very important, right? And also a quick win to, for example, CDP data, I think, is extremely crucial. And there's something that we use. So sometimes we have customers that they are still large corporations, but they are starting their journey. And they have questions to such, okay, in my sector, what are the main, let's say in scope 3, categories that I need to focus based on my peers, right? In a very simple way, you can go to the CDP, you can analyze the data, so you have the quick start of what to focus, right? So I think the data is super important, and we have in Terrascope, every customer that we work, and I'm very proud to share this, 100% of them, when we finish a measurement, we put them in 2 tracks. 100% of the customers have a specifically plan that we give to them, how are you going to improve your data year over year? And a separate plan is 100% of them, what are the key decarbonization levers you need to run? And those two are going to be running in parallel. At the moment that you implement a new decarbonization lever, your data, your measurement are going to change. So you need to balance those 2 tracks to build the credibility on the data, but also taking action to decarbonize.
Good. Any reflection?
I just think this is a really important conversation. And actually what tends to happen, and whether it's at national level or corporate level, is people miss that. We've all missed our targets, right? We're wildly off track. And what we say is, okay, reset your target. We need another round of NDCs. And by the way, there's some good stuff in that, because we do want to see near-term deliverables. I mean, as a minister, I think I was one of the very few ministers that actually had to sign off on 5-year whole-of-economy carbon budgets and stand up in Parliament and be grilled as to why we had missed them. But the response tends to be, okay, just set new targets, not why are we so missing? What is the block? Is it a financial block? Is it a motivation block? What is it that is causing us to miss our targets? And also, there is a truism, isn't there, that we have assumed that this transition will be quite linear. You know, these beautiful pathways that people draw. This is not how the world works. New technologies are not introduced in a linear fashion. They are very lumpy. And so, again, this is I guess my point a little bit about perfection. We try to make this a very smooth, academic, theoretical conversation. The real world is a mess. And what you need to do is have scrutiny and focus on, well, okay, you've missed the target, why? And by the way, what would enable you to accelerate, to double down on the next set of measures? And I think that is where these conversations and this data provision is so helpful, is to actually support those conversations, but to also be really honest about the why. You know, and I guess everyone in this room will know this because they're practitioners. We trust governments way too much, right? With this idea that somehow a government, a group of politicians are going to set the trajectory for the country for net zero, and they're going to write it into law even and go, I guess what, laws can be repealed, parties can change, prime ministers can change, and you can have a radical shift in approach. I think we trust a little too much in the regulatory framework, and we don't trust enough in really deep problem solving as to what is the blocker. There are some great things. I mean, the announcement of things like Altera at COP28, which is a very structured, well-funded investment framework focused on the global south. So we can actually start to put some of the world's best minds on this challenge of financial transfer. We are starting to address the why, but the solution is not just to reset the targets.
So we're coming rapidly close to time, which is what happens with a good conversation. So I'm going to give Felipe and then Sherry a bit of a last word. And it's with the standard question that I ask this kind of a gathering, which is, we're looking back from the year 2030. And we're going to reflect on what we talked about in 2024. What did we talk about too much? What did we not talk about enough? So Felipe, you're up first, and then Sherry, it's for you.
And I don't get to answer at all? I've said.
If you can do it in 20 seconds, you can answer it. How about that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Felipe.
Yeah, I think the first thing, we talk a lot.
Yes.
I think there is a lot of talking, there is a lot of events, but I think the main thing here is, I think we need to pivot a little bit to say, measurement and data and reporting, those things in its table stakes, right? So those are the things that should be the basics, etc. We needed to push more conversations in terms of decarbonization. That's the first thing. The second, we need to push more conversations that we move away from how is this bringing value for the company. Whatever we call value about saving costs, creating new, reducing risks, but how can we bring that close to the business? Because I think that's what really gonna drive the change. The third one is just, to be honest, I think we need to stay positive. I just want to say it's extremely hard to work in sustainability, so we needed to stay positive, because it's very easy when you try to do something, you have a lot of criticism, so important to move ahead.
Sherry.
I think we talked too ethereally about what we're trying to achieve, and I think we need to pivot our language to a whole of economy approach, which means we need to talk more about what business leaders care about so that they can keep investing in this. Because if we think about who are the actors that are going to make the biggest difference, yes, policymakers are going to influence that, but it is companies and corporations that are at the heart of this. So what do they talk about? They talk about access to capital, what do their customers want, their business efficiencies, and compliance. That's the ABCs of the base of the data that they're providing, and we need to tell them that it is worth it and it's a return on your investment.
Awesome.
Carbon removal. We've got to talk about it, we've got to do it in the highest quality way, and we've got to do it in a way that delivers massive co-benefits for people and nature.
Thank you very much. We are right on time, and we will be removing our elemental carbon from the stage in favor of the next panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Very well done.
It's very fun. Thank you.